But back to the submarines deal. 11 subs over the next 40 years. Heaven knows, in fact, what the world will be like by then. Who will we need the subs to defend us from? But it's clear that at least the first of these subs are to defend us from China. But if there is a war soon with China, how's it actually going to play out? And will more subs actually save us? Well, someone has just written a book on that very topic. The Next Major War, it's called. Can the US and its allies win against China? Here's Australian Ross Babbage, who's with the Washington-based Centre for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. He was also the former head of strategic analysis in our Office of National Assessments, right on top of judging what the threats are. And Ross Babbage joins me now. Ross, always great to talk to you. Now, if there is war, it's almost certainly going to start with China attacking democratic Taiwan. China says it actually belongs to Taiwan, must come back under its control. How likely is such a war?
Well, unfortunately, Andrew, I think it's actually much more likely than we'd like it to be. I actually think it's an even bet right now, because what you've got is Xi Jinping stating and promising to his own people numerous occasions that they're going to take back or take Taiwan. Of course, the Communist Party has never ruled Taiwan, but they're saying it should be part of China. On the other hand, you've had, since his election, you've had the President Biden saying 4 times, very directly, that if China attacks Taiwan, then the United States will have forces there immediately to help defend Taiwan. So I think this is a very, very serious risk. And I think we've got to prepare a range of things to make sure that if the worst comes to the worst, and we find ourselves fighting such a war, that we really are not taken by surprise, and we know what to expect, and we're well prepared, not just with the military, but there's a range of other things that are required as well.
Okay, well, describe how this war will actually open. How will it start? Will there be an invasion? How will it start? How will it spread?
Well, there's a number of possibilities, but the most likely thing is that the Chinese would run a major exercise in the area and then suddenly switch and try and seize the essential parts of Taiwan, really very quickly before anyone can really effectively respond in a matter of hours. And we've seen them preparing for this. In fact, within China, there are full-scale replicas of key facilities and buildings in Taiwan that they've built, and they have elements of the PLA, the Chinese military, actually practice assaults on these buildings, and they do it pretty regularly. And so I think the intent would be to try and seize in a very rapid operation before the United States or anyone else could really effectively respond. And we're likely to see a lot of intense cyber attacks on Taiwan and perhaps other people around. And on top of that, we're likely to see the Chinese use a lot of firepower. And they've got about 1,400 ballistic and cruise missiles, which have the capability to strike Taiwan literally within an hour or two.
And of course, they can count on a lot of sympathisers within the Taiwanese population, so no doubt they're working on that as well. And their hope will then be seize Taiwan before America can react and do anything about it. What next? How do we get dragged in?
Well, I think what would happen is I think Allied intelligence is going to be watching extremely closely. And as you probably know, the Americans are already working with the Taiwanese to build up their capability to hold out, if you like, but also to defend themselves rather effectively. And they're working very actively on doing that. So what we're seeing is a really substantial effort made to A, deter the Chinese in the first place, and B, to make sure that the Chinese cannot pull off a surprise immediate assault. They can throw a lot of firepower, but it probably won't defeat the Taiwanese, and it won't prevent the Americans actually being involved almost immediately. So that's what I think is going to happen.
So if I read you right, then we need to have, and America too, assets so close to Taiwan that they can intervene within an hour or within several hours, or at least within a day. You can't have them sitting, in some port 2 days, 3 days sailing away. Does that mean the subs that we get or that we loan from America will prove to be very useful, because they can loiter in the South China Sea, for instance, for 2-3 months?
Absolutely. And that, in fact, there are two main categories or three main categories of capability that I think would be used by the Allies very quickly. Firstly, I think there'd be a lot of cyber activity to thwart the Chinese assault. Secondly, there will be already, and I'm not going to say a lot about this, but in a crisis like this, there will be submarines that'll be able to make short work of the major assault force that might come across on the sea. I think the main initial assault, though, would go by air. And that's a bit more complicated, but the Taiwanese, with a lot of support from the Americans, can make it very difficult for the Chinese to actually gain a foothold and to stay there. So it would be really messy, and it would be very, very fast moving, and there'd be a lot of firepower being thrown around. But the submarines have enormous advantages because they can sit around and in a stealthy way without being detected for a very extended period of time. We're talking about, if we want, really months. And they do have enormous firepower. And it's not just torpedoes, which many people think about, but they can lay mines, make life difficult in that respect in certain key areas. And they can also fire missiles against not only ships, but also against land targets. And they can really complicate very, very substantially any assault on Taiwan. So submarines are very, very important in the scheme.
Right. Well, lastly, Ross Babbage, one of the reasons some people are saying that we're looking at a war within the next, before the end of the decade, is that China senses that there is this massive military buildup. I went through it earlier in the show. From around the region, but countries that have been caught napping, Japan, us, etc., with, oh my God, we're not ready. And then there will be this gap in time where we haven't got up to speed with the size of the threat. Do you buy that? What is this window of opportunity that China might see?
Look, I think China, the leadership in Beijing really has some serious problems that we tend not to think too much about in Australia, perhaps. The economy has some problems. The population is aging. There is a sense in Beijing that they need to, if they're going to conduct an operation, the likes of which we've just been talking about, then they're going to have to move early. And that because by the time you get into the mid-2030s, basically it'll be a lot harder for them. It'll be harder because of their own internal problems, their own internal weaknesses, probably, but also in terms of the Allied response capability being much stronger. The Americans are building on a raft of things which are going to affect this region greatly and help us. But of course, obviously, we're investing a lot more, and the Japanese are now deciding to double their defence expenditure, and they're going to make a substantial contribution as well.
I think that explains the huge scramble by America and all its allies, it seems, or most of them, to get ready. If people are wondering what's going on. Ross Babbage, always great to talk to you. Thank you for that great analysis.